In Holmes County, deputies are investigating a shooting that left 2 women dead after a fight that was shown on Facebook Live.
If someone knew this was going to take place, they would have called, let us intervene. And if people come to your house, if you could pick up the phone, call 911, give us a chance to respond to this, and that, you know, maybe we can handle it in a better way than just taking a life.
Put that beam on her then, bitch. Put that beam on her. Put that red light on me so I can show where you shooting at, hoe. Put that red light on me. Come on, bitch. We pulls the fuck up. What's wrong with you? Girl, we on Facebook. We don't internet thug. We don't motherfucking internet thug. What the hell wrong with you?
Get the fuck on. Get the fuck on.
Hell.
Get the fuck on. Get that motherfucking truck. Get the goddamn truck. I'm in the night, motherfucker. You a bitch. Get the fuck on. Come on. Y'all want to play on my person? Huh? Come on, bitch. Okay. Get the fuck on. Get on. Go. Bitch, get the fuck on. Get the fuck on, bitch. Okay. Get the fuck on. Truck seat. Get out my truck.
Hold on, let me get her. Get her one.
Get the fuck on.
Hold on, let me get that one.
What's up, study group? Welcome to Black History Student. I'm your host, Black Butterfly. Today we'll be discussing aggressive and masculine black women because this subset of women have been made to represent the black female collective, and this just isn't true. Black women are treated as a single group of aggressive and masculine women with bad attitudes and uncooperative behavior, and this is said to render them undesirable. But it's impossible for all black women to possess the same negative characteristics when they don't share the same black experience or identity. Therefore, all black women simply can't be lumped into a single group of undesirable women. Their differences represent a reality that's shaped by a diversity of experiences that they endured as they journeyed their blackness in white society. The only thing black women have in common is receiving and absorbing messages of self-hate, and this impacts them in complex ways. Black women that are aggressive and masculine possess internalized pain that causes them to direct internal rage and hostility outward. There are many reasons why black women are hurting and aggressive, regardless of their class or financial status, but the overall causations can be rooted to slavery and the discriminative forces put into place to maintain that system. Now, Dr. Naeem Akbar wrote a book titled Breaking the Chains of Psychological Slavery, and he says that slavery is the modern Genesis experience for Africans in the Western world. Contained in this Genesis much about the continued social, economic, political, and cultural reality of African Americans. He goes on to say that the slavery that captures the mind and imprisons the motivation, perception, aspiration, and identity in a web of anti-self images, generating a personal and collective self-destruction, is more cruel than the shackles on the wrists and ankles. The slavery that feeds on the mind, invading the soul of man, destroying his loyalties to himself, and establishing allegiance to forces which destroy him, is an even worse form of capture. The influences that permit an illusion of freedom, liberation, and self-determination, while tenaciously holding one's mind in subjugation, is the folly of only the sadistic. The psychological and social impact that slavery had on black women's minds are influencing their current attitudes, behaviors, and responses. Now, after black people were emancipated from slavery in 1865, they were released into the wilderness with not a single program, institution, or system put into place to help them transition from captivity to citizenry. This means that they started civilian life poor, ignorant, and uprooted from family. They were lacking traditions and rituals, and they were without efficient support from the dominant society to build black families and communities. This was the beginning of a permanent sense of inferiority molded into the collective minds of black people, and this sparked anger, frustration, hopelessness, and helpless identities. Black women simply have no control over the forces that directly affect their lives. The only control they have is their reaction and attitudes towards those forces. Think about it. They don't have control over any institutions that dictate how they live or operate. They don't control where they can live or what school their children can attend. And because of their lack of corporate ownership, they can't even control where they work or the type of benefits they receive or even promotions based on strong work merit. Black women can't even control their reputation or the images that reflect them. And they definitely can't control how black men view and treat them. Dr. Dr. Naeem Ekbar says that the frightening fact is that we control absolutely nothing. Our token presence on city councils, mayoral offices, or religious organizations does not mean that we are in control. He goes on to add that we do not control the water flowing into the faucets, we do not control the lights, we do not control the buildings, we do not control the paved streets, we do not control the gas, the food, or we do not control anything that affects our lives. Neither do we control the basic agenda or direction of any of these institutions. Unfortunately, we often do not care that we don't control anything, and furthermore, we are defiant in preserving our dependence. Most black women haven't been able to escape the clutches of poverty since emancipation. Therefore, they come from poverty, and sometimes this is extreme poverty, where they were raised in violence and lack the support and protection of their environment. Many times, this causes them to construct an angry identity. And even if they were raised in middle class or affluent environments, if their family or community weren't supportive or were neglectful and abusive, the results can be the same. Then you have street code. Street code causes many angry black women to exert behaviors that are typical of boys and men who are trying to obtain manhood. Part of street code is the manifestation of a tough persona, and this protects them from potential harm, whether it be from peers, family, or other external factors. This is especially the case if they were raised in a toxic home with neglectful or abusive parents or caretakers. There are physical, sexual, emotional, and mental abuse are many times indicative of numerous black women's upbringing, and those that never remedy the pain tend to be hostile and aggressive. Helplessness and hopelessness are also reasons that a multitude of black women are angry. Single parenthood with no support from the child's father, lack of education, low or no income, joblessness, failure of the community and family support, and most importantly, no foreseeable end to their despair. This can cause frustration and harshness. Many of these women are so broken internally that they completely disregard themselves externally. And this is why you have so many black women who don't comb their hair or have poor hygiene or just overweight, obese. Many of them have filthy homes that are infested with all sorts of bugs, unwanted pests. Dr. Naeem Ekbar says that the slaves were kept filthy, and the very nature of physical restraints over long periods of time began to develop in the people a sense of helplessness. The loss of the ability to even clean one's body and to shield oneself from a blow began to teach the slaves that they should have no self-respect. Many times, black women can be very promiscuous, and these women allow men to sexually violate their bodies because, in addition to not having any self-respect, a lot of them have to survive. That's why prostitution, strip dancing, and pornography in many cases are their first job. These women lack efficient employment prospects and see no other means for earning an income that's substantial enough to support her and her children. So she ends up using her body as a commodity for sustenance. There's an author named Rajan Persad who wrote a book titled Why Black Men Love White Women, Going Beyond Sexual Politics to the Heart of the Matter. And he talks about the roles of black women during slavery. He says that picking cotton and cleaning houses were not the only value of a female slave. She became a commodity to be traded, sold, and hoarded to satisfy a variety of hungers in the white male's appetite. Essentially, some of the first pimps may have been sitting presidents. Her humanity had no value, but her vagina often carried a high value, especially since it was unlimited. Then Dr. Naeem Ekbar adds to this point. He says that the African American woman was valued primarily as a breeder or sexual receptacle capable of having many healthy children. Her work as a human being was reduced to the particular financial value or personal pleasure she could hold for the master. As a breeder, she was to be mated with the plantation's strongest studs, regardless of human attachment. She was also usually expected to be receptive to the sexual exploitation of the slave master, his relatives, or friends. Many black women are living because they had children too young, such as teen pregnancy. And a lot of them have more children than they can even manage, or aren't able to sufficiently provide for or protect. So many kids are simply unruly and out of control, and many parents simply weren't ready or aren't willing to parent their kids. These women live an irritable life where they are argumentative or easily angered and indifferent to others, even their own children. Jealousy is another reason many black women express angry emotions and hostile behavior, especially if they have unrealistic expectations or fail to meet their own personal goals. Most times, these women have low self-esteem and poor self-image. And because their grandmothers, mothers, or other females never addressed their pain, and the men in their environment were oppressed and subjugated, which essentially means that they failed to protect and provide for them, these black women tend to pass on cycles of toxic behaviors to their children. These children grow up to exhibit those same toxic characteristics and then pass it on to their offspring. Before you know it, the toxic behavior becomes generational.
Listen, parents, quit running your house as if it's a fucking democracy. It is not. Your household is a dictatorship.
Well,
do what I say, do or fucking else.
But now they have this thing called gentle parenting.
Oh, I believe in gentle parenting.
Do you?
You're living, aren't you?
Surviving is not thriving.
But you are thriving. You survived it. I was very gentle. I was very gentle. I give you passes from time to time. See, you survived that night coming in my house drunk, throwing up on my damn carpet in my bathroom, talking about your cycle was on. Your damn cycle wasn't on. You were drunk.
Well, at that point, I was way too old for gentle parenting. Gentle parenting is like when they're growing up, you don't whoop them.
Oh, hell no. The Bible says, spare the rod, spoil the child. So I believe in whipping that ass. I don't believe in abuse, but I believe in whipping that ass and letting that ass know, reach out and touch somebody's ass. Yeah. Make this world a better place.
Cry, the less you pee. Those are the words of the noted psychologist and expert in trauma, Mercedes Mann, my grandmother. That was my first lesson in black folk mental health. In layman's terms, stop all that damn crying. In more clinical terms, it's a passed down coping mechanism used to teach the internalization of trauma to maintain survival. It's giving very much, this is what I learned, so this is what I'm going to teach you. Black people have mastered survival. Surviving and living and loving and worshiping and being so damn beautiful. But I wonder, how? What protective factors are at play? So I have a theory. Ride out with me on this one. Trauma responses. In order to maintain survival, black people have integrated trauma responses into the culture. So much so that we hand it down from generation to generation under the guise of values and traditions. Let's get into it. Let's talk science. Trauma responses are a physiological reaction in response to a perceived harmful event, a threat, or a threat to survival. A necessary system, it was wired into the human nervous system in order to keep us safe. So if there was a bear in the wild, this system would kick in to maintain survival. While it's necessary, it was never intended to be a long-term solution. The body is not meant to stay in that state of arousal. It's supposed to be short-term. Keep that in mind. All right, boom, let's talk American history. During the transatlantic slave trade, Europeans built the foundation of this country on the raping, pillaging, enslaving, dehumanizing of Africans. They used mental, physical, and spiritual warfare in order to integrate white supremacy into the violence. They skewed psychology, religion, and science, all to justify this treatment. For example, drapetomania, which is when enslaved Africans would attempt to run away, was once a mental health diagnosis. So, with all that said, traumatizing black bodies is as American as the strange fruit in apple pie. When a community is traumatized over and over, it causes a collective trauma experience. So when we put the science and the history together, white supremacy is the bear. White supremacy is the bear. But let's take it a step further. When I started, I said, the more you cry, the less you pee as a clinical intervention. Due to the black trauma experience my grandmother had learned and subsequently was teaching, the internalization of emotions is a safety concern. To externalize emotions does not maintain survival.
Now, the masses of poor black women are alienated from middle-class society, and it will be this society that will teach them traditional ideals of femininity. And because they haven't had a real example of how to be feminine, their behavior contradicts mainstream society's standard norms of womanhood. This is why a poverty-stricken unmarried woman would breed with a conquered black man and have a bunch of children that she can't afford or support. She may even date men who simply aren't conducive to improving her situation. And these guys add more complications to her already overwhelmed life. One of the main reasons that these women don't even get married is because the men they choose simply aren't ideal partners. If they're not committing to the relationship, they're usually a liability to it. Author Dr. David Hilfiker wrote a book called Urban Injustice: How Ghettos Happen, and he talks about the effects of poverty on young people. He says that poverty leads to despair. Chronic poverty impairs one's motivation to aspire to something greater than what one sees in the environment. Poverty and despair mean that young men see few options for proving themselves other than fathering a child. Young women see few options for finding a valued place in the community other than becoming a mother. For many young women, really young girls, having a child may be the only way of finding someone to love or be loved by. Sex and childbirth among teenagers in the ghetto then is more about personal affirmation than about status or a ticket to a better life or the future. Economic prospects for young inner city women are so bleak, regardless of marital status, that there is little reason to value marriage. Desperation can lead to a sense that there is little to lose or that everything already is lost. In fact, a girl from a poor inner city family sacrificed only a few of her already limited options by having a child out of wedlock. Let's be clear, in most poor black communities, majority of the people are hardworking and honest, but they are blended with disenfranchised black men and women who simply are not. As they battle against the destruction in their communities, they also have to fight against a racist political American system, and this system hinders their socioeconomic advancement. Dr. David Hilfiker says that observe carefully in any inner city neighborhood and you will see many strong, resourceful, independent people who are not only keeping their heads above water, but doing their best to strengthen the community as well. The problem is that these people are swimming against overwhelming current of forces that constantly threatens to overpower even the strongest. Violence in poor black communities make girls and women exhibit misunderstood characteristics as they learn to survive street culture. Poor black neighborhoods are flooded with drug and gun trading, and this directly relates to violence of all kinds, including sexual assaults, murder, robbery, physical attacks, and so on. And the kids that live in these environments have to share them with criminals, and they tend to look up to these people. Gang members tend to dominate the communities, and they cause significant social disorganization. Meanwhile, young black girls are constantly exposed to aggression, and they learn early on that violence and hostility are appropriate means to handle indifference and conflict, which is why they grow up to become difficult adults. Several young girls are bullied and antagonized by their peers, and this causes them to construct a hardened exterior. Because safety can be compromised at any moment in their environment, most of these black girls live according to the street code, and this code forces them to become bullies themselves. These girls are willing to combat boys, girls, men, and women if it means protecting their reputation. But unfortunately, many of these girls carry this negative behavior into adulthood, and this prevents them from maintaining healthy relationships. Author Nikki Jones wrote a book called Between Good and Ghetto: African American Girls and Inner City Violence. And she says that by the time a girl is known as a fighter, she has embraced an identity that directly contradicts expectations of normative femininity, which bears heavily upon her life. She is not passive or submissive. She does not defer to power or authority. She is not a good girl in the minds of others. She is a ghetto chick, a woman who is not interested in or able to meet mainstream or local expectations regarding acceptable femininity. A person's cultural background and life experiences shape their character, beliefs, and responses. Authors Flavio Marsiglia and Kulis wrote a book titled Diversity, Oppression, and Change. They talked about influential cultural background. They said that cultural background influences the way people think and act. Many take these cultural influences for granted and often are unaware of their profound impact on their lives and the lives of others. Members of cultural minorities affect their daily thoughts, conversations, and interactions, often reminding them that others view and treat them as different. They go on to say that culture not only is a distinctive set of prescriptions about how to act and what to expect in the world, but also is a source of strength and inspiration that helps people cope with the daily stressors they face. Now let's be clear, not all black girls that grew up in poor environments end up broken adults. Despite being underprivileged, some black women grow up in supportive black communities with loving parents and family. Several of these women leave their poor environment and go on to become successful middle class or even affluent adults. But this simply isn't the case for the black female masses that were raised in such settings, and these women tend to use toughness, hostility, and aggression as a means of social control and personal security. Some broken black women also escape the clutches of poverty and become successful adults, but they're unable to shed the wounds of their past, and therefore they carry a negative attitude and possess poor communication skills that simply make them difficult. They really live inauthentic lives, and they hide their pain with their beauty and success while maintaining prosperous professional lives, but personally their relationships suffer, and they're usually difficult to deal with. Many times their self-esteem, their safety, reputation, their status, respectability, their freedom and mobility, their identity and space were violated in their lives, and this leaves them angry and hurting. Then black women in corporate have to deal with systemic racism in a way that can be mentally debilitating. Being overlooked for positions they qualify for because they're black and then female is just too much for any black woman to bear. Not being respected because others think they only got their position because of affirmative action, when in all actuality they tend to be more qualified than they are. And if they work in a predominantly white female environment, they have to deal with disloyalty and unnecessary competition. They can't wear the same clothes as white women because their bodies are too sexualized and their natural hair is inappropriate. On the other hand, if they work in a predominantly white male environment, they face corporate politics that prevent them from advancement, or they feel ostracized because they're not part of the good old boy network. There's also black women that find it terribly difficult to work with other black women. They experience the nasty attitudes and the jealousy and the competitiveness, and this stuff is so overwhelming that many black women prefer to work with white women. Then having to deal with sexually harassing black men is another issue that so many black women face in corporate settings. Not in all cases, but there are so many situations where black men are so unprofessional in corporate settings, and this could just be overwhelming. I mean, there are a multitude of black women that have to deal with this and so much more, and this can make them angry and hostile.
Workshops where you're talking about racial equity and inclusion, and the leader is always one white woman by herself. You're belying the very thing your workshop's about, but still calling on us for our intellectual capital because black women do the work. We do the work. We just don't get compensated for the work. Our labor is usually free, and so you want our input, but when it's time to hire somebody or have someone lead, you don't call us. Don't ask me how I feel about that, because I'm burning some bridges today. Don't tell me how inclusive you are when we know that 87% of the CEOs of nonprofits in the United States are white, although most of them serve communities of color. That tells me that you're really comfortable with serving us as a charitable cause, but you don't respect me and want me to be your leader. You don't want me at the table for decision making. I'm burning some bridges today.
There are also so many black women that complain about being raised by narcissistic, abusive mothers. Now, this is really, really big in the black community. These types of mothers will destroy their self-esteem and confidence and overall will of their black daughters. They provide no guidance, no support, no acceptance, and most importantly, no love. If the daughter have younger siblings, many times she's forced to fend for them because the mother either has to work or she's indifferent to her children. How many situations have you heard the mother literally leaving their kids in a hotel or a motel or a house all by themselves? She got 8 or 9 kids while she catch a flight to go somewhere to a party, a concert, to dance, or whatever she's doing, and neighbors end up calling the police because the children are walking around, the children filthy, or the children are begging for food. These are mothers that tend to be indifferent to their children. They'll let their abusive boyfriends beat the hell out of the kids or even kill them.
Enough is enough. Save the kids.
Oh my God, please, you kill me! I don't care!
can't just leave with the kids. Like, no, that's not how it's going. You have to follow about what the court tell you to do. And they want the children to be around one another, and they want the children to know each other, because that's for the well-being of the children. So as far as him thinking that he can just take the kids and do whatever freak he want to do, no, you cannot. That's just not how it goes. The father definitely have rights like me, but they cannot, because I have rights as well, they can't just take the children out the state without notifying the courts, because they are not their children. Right now, the children don't belong to him or me. The children are wards of the state. Okay? Until they figure out what the custody arrangements is later on, if I can get my kids back into my sole custody.
And then the daughter is required to then grow up very young. And this makes her vulnerable and susceptible to problematic external forces. Many of these girls end up teenage mothers or sexually assaulted at some point in their youth. Black women also complain about having black mothers that competed against them. These mothers tend to have been jealous of their youthful figure or their intellect and beauty, most times wishing to be them. These are the mothers that are hostile and they verbally abuse their girls. They'll fight them like grown women in the street. I mean, just imagine your mother acting like she hates you. I mean, this could leave anyone lacking the sense of belonging and self-worth. Too many black girls don't have an identity because they spent their entire lives being called a bitch, hoe, trash, and other vitriolic names by their mother. Author Nikki Jones tells a story of a 19-year-old single mother named Amber who was raised by a terribly abusive mother. She says that Amber has lived in a city-funded home for young mothers for 2 of the last 3 years. It's the home her 2-year-old son Keenan has ever known. She was placed there after the city's Department of Youth and Family Services brought a case against her mother. Amber said, "When I had Keenan, me and my mom had got into a fight, and the Department of Youth and Family Services told me not to go back home." Amber and her mother have fought for as long as she could remember, and the Department of Youth and Family Services has had to intervene many times. She says, "Man, my mom abused my sister, and my sister turning 30, punched my sister in the eye, gave my sister a black eye, bloodshot her eye, bloodshot my eye. She used to beat us with an extension cord when we was little and stuff." When Amber was younger, school officials contacted the Department of Youth and Family Services after her sister arrived at school with a black eye. Now, black mothers that aren't married and have low self-esteem would do anything to have a man, even to the detriment of her daughters. And don't let the man not want her children. She will then put them off onto the grandmother or other family members to raise. Many of these women become jealous if they think their man find their daughters attractive. And the worst part is that these girls tend to be too young to even recognize the man's pedophilic signals, but the desperate black woman resents the girls for it anyways. She'll put the young girls out on the street at a very young age or allow the pedophile to advance to molest her. Many of the girls end up running away from home to the streets where they end up exploited. And there is a significant percentage of young black girls and women prostituting to survive. These women tend to be supporting drug and alcohol addiction or just perpetuating other self-destructive behaviors.
Welcome to Street Voices. Give it a like.
Knowledge Seeker 78 is asking, what's the proper way to approach you at work?
Hey, baby.
What kind of requests have you had? Have you had any like freaky ass requests before?
I had a request that to fuck a dog in him.
Damn, did you do it?
No. Hello, Street Voices. My name is Hennessy.
Where are you from, Hennessy?
I'm from Stockton, California.
How long have you been in the game for?
Only been in the game for a year.
For a year. What got you in it?
Just need a little bit of money. I had a baby.
Okay. You still with the baby daddy?
No.
No? What about your parents? They don't help you out?
No.
What's your relationship with your parents?
It's off and on. Regular.
Okay, like do you get along with them?
No, not really. So it's like an off and on love and hate relationship, like a normal mother-father bond.
Gotcha. What about brothers and sisters?
I don't get along with none of them.
How many do you have?
I have 5.
5, okay. Are they in the life too?
No, it's like 2 of them, and they all they're dudes.
Okay. So they're managers.
Yeah.
We like to call them managers on the show.
Yeah.
Okay, so they kind of introduced you. So you kind of saw the life. You saw the girls working.
Yeah.
Right, growing up. What about your pops? Does he fuck around?
My dad, he was one.
Oh, okay.
He was a manager too.
Do they know you're working now?
No, he don't. He passed away.
Oh, gotcha.
So yeah, he really don't.
What kind of upbringing did you have? Like did you see like a lot of drugs? Was they abusive towards you?
Yeah, I had abuse, but my mom did drugs around me.
Many times after witnessing their mother, father, or environment abuse substances, these black girls wound up on drugs or become alcoholics. Some of them abuse substances to escape the reality because their lives are simply too unbearable to operate in this current state. And there are hardly any sufficient resources available to these women to combat their addictions. Drug and alcohol treatment programs in poor areas usually last only 30 days before they dump the women back into the same environment that led to the abuse in the first place. And without quality programs, some black girls end up in detention centers and women end up serving long sentences in prison. Black women represent the largest percentage of women in prison, but black people only make up 13.9% of the American population, so clearly the numbers don't make sense. Further, there are endless black mothers with black children in prison, and these mothers are torn over losing their kids to the white supremacist judicial system. Not to mention how embarrassed they are for the reason the kid was sent there to begin with. One can only imagine how this can make any woman feel like a failed mother, and many of these women express their anger and self-hatred in many ways, including hostility. There are many black women that are angry because of the disappointment and unreliability of the black men in their lives. There are countless scenarios of women who have never met their father, and a father's primary responsibility is to provide for, protect, and support his children. This is something that most black women have never experienced in their lives. A father teaches his daughter how to love and be loved and protects her from other men. A woman can acquire her identity from her father, but when he's not there or never been around, she's forced to find herself in a world that simply makes no space for her. Having no father also causes black girls to become sexually irresponsible, as they mistake sex for love, seeking the affection that a daughter can only get from her father. Then she has to navigate the male species with no understanding of what she's up against. Dr. Naeem Ekbar says that the virtues of being able to protect, support, and provide for one's offspring, which is the cornerstone of true fatherhood, were not considered the mark of a man on the plantation. In fact, the slave who sought to assert such rights for his offspring was likely to be branded as a troublemaker and either punished or killed. After several generations of unnatural treatment, the African American man adapted and began to resist the role of a true father. While several fathers abandon their daughters, others sexually assault theirs. Incest is overwhelming in black society, and many mothers ignore the act, usually allowing the offender to not only remain around the family, but the victim too. Author Melba Wilson wrote a book called Crossing the Boundary: Black Women Survive Incest, where she tells this story of what happened to this one black woman who told her mother that she was being abused by her father. According to the victim, she said, "I never told anyone, not even my favorite teacher at school. Mostly out of fear that my telling would bring the same results as when I first tried to tell my mother. I was about 5 years old. I remember that evening well, and the lesson that I learned from it: never tell a soul." I can never forget the look on my mother's face as she hit and kicked and punched me. Her anger at me for what I'd said and not at him for what he'd done. I don't remember the words, only the pain as she threw me from one side of the room to the other, and then stood by as my father did the same. And the confusion that reigned in my head, I thought it was all my fault. I must have done something wrong. For years after that, I tried to hide away from the knowledge that I had been sexually abused as a child.
Had a child, when he fathered a child, when the male fathered a child, he had no authority over that child. Only the authority that the slave master allowed. If the slave master wanted to sell the child, beat the child, sell the child, or even kill the child, the father had limited authority over that. So black folk could not deal with the humiliation, so they chose other ways in which to deal with it. So they ignored it. So the males became distant from the obligation of his family. Sure, he would drop the seed, but as far as the obligation and some other things, he would deal with that in a different way, because there was no other choice for him. The choices were limited. That has had a devastating effect on us, because those things were passed down. Those things were part of our traditional experience here in America.
Single black mothers whose child's father abandoned them or failed to meet their emotional and material expectations end up angry and bitter. When men lack loyalty and commitment, it leaves black women vulnerable and feeling isolated. So many black women aren't awarded a space to rest in their femininity because they're sleeping with their enemies, spending most of their time looking over their shoulders, trying to anticipate their man's next move. They're put in positions of having to play the traditional roles assigned to men, such as protector and provider for the family. Dr. Naeem Ekbar says that today in African American communities around America, we carry the mark of the strong-armed stud from slavery. He occurs as the modern-day pimp, or the man who delights in leaving neglected babies dispersed around town. He is the man who feels that he is a man only by physical, violent, or sexual exploits. He leaves welfare or chance to father his children, as he fathers his ride, or his vines, or his pad. Such family irresponsibility does not occur among African people who have never endured the ravages of slavery, or who were able to preserve their cultural integrity in spite of slavery.
Do you feel like more mothers are choosing to have the government assist them with raising their children than a man?
Yes.
Yes. And you feel like that if they had a choice, they wouldn't choose to be co-parenting with the father of their children. You don't think that they would prefer to have that help?
Well, you got to look at it like this. I'm talking about marriage. So they're preferring to go against marriage and just be.
I was married.
Huh? I was.
And I stand by what I'm going to say now.
Okay.
Even the women that do receive that assistance, I argue it's the absent fathers that is actually receiving the assistance. Because the government is only doing the job that they're neglecting to do. So if you sit here and you say that women are getting WIC and Title IX and this, that, and other, actually it's the fathers that's getting it, because if they was given more than 30
are literally the worst parents on the entire planet. That's the first thing. And statistics back that. So over 70% of young men that grow up under a single mother in particular, end up in prison. And because the reason why so many of us are messed up is because we were all, or most of us, were raised by women, which are the worst parents on the entire planet, statistical wise.
Oh boy, I don't know about y'all, but I am skeptical of a dude who is wearing janky-ass transition sunglasses indoors while he says something as outrageous as, single mothers are the worst parents on the planet. Without questioning, I don't know, how women became single mothers in the first place, and also saying something like, that's just the fact, statistical-wise. Not really inspiring a whole lot of confidence in the validity of his argument. But just in case you're not convinced that this isn't the biggest pile of horseshit, let me really take a moment to eviscerate this argument for all of you. So first, let's get into the basics before we even get to the numbers. I guarantee you that the type of dudes who go off about single mothers being terrible hold two core beliefs. The first is that women are responsible for getting themselves pregnant. And no, I'm not talking about immaculate conception, but I am talking about the misogynistic viewpoint that argues that women should be virginal or less free with their sexuality, so that they wouldn't get themselves into this kind of situation in the first place. And the second is that women are responsible for not choosing a better partner with whom to procreate. Again, if they were more selective and less willing to sleep around than men, they would have a better chance of finding an upstanding gentleman with whom to parent. So what do these beliefs have in common? It's that they remove fathers from the equation entirely. There is no call for accountability for men who leave, and the men that shirk responsibility for caring for their children. There is no recognition that it is men who create the condition of single motherhood. And because we've grown up in a patriarchal, sexist society that is rooted in the idea that child rearing is fundamentally the woman's sphere, and that most women are to blame for men's bad behavior, that we are so quick to place the burden on single mothers here. It's why we more often say single mother instead of absent father or fatherless family. It's why a woman in Texas was indicted by a grand jury in the deaths of her 2 daughters because she let them get in the car with their father, who later crashed and killed them and was found to be under the influence of alcohol. And it's automatically why we think every serial killer does what they do. Charles Manson's mom didn't love him enough, so he created a cult and went on a killing spree. No sympathy for Mommy Dearest, who was a 15-year-old child that got impregnated by a 24-year-old man who lied about being a colonel in the army and then said he had to leave for army business but never returned. And as for the arguments that this dude makes statistics-wise, there are a few things to note here. If we look at data from the Justice Department in their survey of inmates from federal and state correctional facilities, we'll find that 47% of convicted criminals report growing up in a single-parent household, and 41% of them say they were raised solely by their mother. And that's a far cry from 70+%. According to the US Census Bureau, there are over 13.5 million single parents raising over 21 million children in this country. 80% of those parents are mothers. So because mothers are doing the majority of the child rearing, they're overrepresented when we try to study these patterns. Of course, there will be more children raised by single mothers who are convicted criminals because there are more children raised by single mothers, period. And if we look at results from longitudinal historical analyses, what we find is that a sizable portion for criminality can be attributed to other factors like low parent education, racial inequality, and poverty. Single moms are one of the most disadvantaged groups in the US. 30% live below the poverty line. You could also point out that 99% of criminals drank apple juice as a kid. But we wouldn't be up in arms about removing apple juice from kids' diets, because apple juice doesn't have the same negative cultural narrative around it that single motherhood does. And we should note that not only do men like to peddle this narrative to serve their own ends and further misogyny, but Republican lawmakers and religious zealots love it too, because it helps push GOP stories about welfare queens and restricting access to public safety nets to help maintain systemic racial inequality and feed the prison industrial complex. And it's let the nutty Christians talk about how the key to solving all problems is a return to traditional family values, where the woman stayed at home and the man was the breadwinner, and gay and trans people are either treated like criminals or animals or like they don't exist at all. So don't let people spouting this garbage go unchecked, y'all.
Look, it's exhausting dealing with the man who doesn't positively contribute to the household, especially if he's always cheating, or he barely works and pays bills, or he's abusive and disrespectful. It simply just makes life unbearable for the woman. Author Rajan Prasad says that, I have seen black women put up with far more nonsense than necessary from black men. I have witnessed black women support black men financially for years and reap nothing but misery. I have watched them take care of black men's children from outside of the relationship without batting an eye. Black women stay in abusive relationships for years, only to be abandoned later for something newer or younger. Sisters also put up with gross infidelity and will often take back the sorriest excuses for men. Brothers have been known to put black women through a good deal of heartache, and more often than not, if a black woman is stressed out, there is some brother behind it. This is where the phrase strong black woman comes from. It was generated to acknowledge that sisters can stomach an unlimited amount of pain and suffering and still keep on. Yet somehow, they still firmly believe that white women are pushovers in relationships. Some offer this opinion. While all women equally put up with nonsense from their men, white women do it silently, but black women have something to say while doing it. I guess this is supposed to mean something. It doesn't matter if you bark while you're being abused or you remain silent, you're still being abused either way. In this sense, Rajan Prasad is highlighting that abuse is abuse. Black women are just as abused as white women, and it doesn't make a difference whether she's loud about it or not. She's still being abused at the hands of the man. Author Nikki Jones describes 19-year-old Amber's abusive relationship with her son Keenan's father. She says that Marvin has hit, punched, and choked her in the past. During an argument, he choked Amber, banging her head up to the wall. Amber's immediate network is limited. She has few people to turn to for assistance in formulating a course of action. One of the main issues that many black men and women complain about is black women who verbally abuse to the point of humiliation and are quick to fight. These type of women are always physically assaulting others. They're impossible to satisfy, and they tend to possess hateful attitudes. Many times they're antagonistic and have an overall indifference to relationships and people. For instance, television personality Jocelyn Hernandez is a 36-year-old woman known for an alleged drug addiction and belligerent behavior. This is a biracial woman who was poverty-stricken in Puerto Rico, and when she came to the States, she gained prominence in the black community because, let's just be real, she's considered a preference. And a preference is a biracial woman with the stereotypical European aesthetics desired by black men. Jocelyn claims to be a black woman, and she's known for her aggressive masculinity. But the problem with her claim to be just a black woman and being aggressive is this only perpetuates the stereotype of the black woman being hostile, masculine, and aggressive. And the worst part is that the black women that do behave this way cause the self-hating black men to proclaim that white women are superior to them.
And let me explain something to y'all. I'm a black girl. I was born in a fucking Spanish island. But you see this here color? What color is this? What color is this? This is black. And don't you ever forget it, that all them white people and all them foreign people gonna always remind me that I'm what? So what the fuck am I?
You can't even speak English. You're not fucking black.
Shut up, ho.
You can't even speak
Bitch, what are
English.
you, bitch?
Why do I have that reputation and I'm not that person? See, I don't like to have that reputation. That reputation does not fit me. Well, what?
Yeah, it does.
That's crazy.
I ain't with it. Mike Johnson not gonna hit me.
Now, some black women are livid because they're desiring love from black men, but too many black men simply hate themselves to love the women back. Many black men seek only sex from black women, and they have no interest or value in committing. The worst part is that they'll have a baby together, and the black father will love that baby wholeheartedly until he breaks up with the mother. Once he and the mother are done, he's essentially done with the relationship with the child. He'll no longer protect or provide for the child if he was doing that to begin with, and then he'll end up abandoning them altogether. Too many black women will settle for any man just to have one. And this means that all he has to do is show a little interest and she'll be willing to give him all of herself. The sad part about it is they usually don't take time to get to know the man before they open up their entire soul to him. Rajan Prasad says that black women are often valued as sexual conquest only. I'd fuck her, but that's about it. Is often a conclusion many brothers come to regarding sisters. How many black minds have been contaminated by similar situations? This is the portion of self-hatred that is most damaging because it prevents black men and women from emotionally relating sensibly. Eventually, when we do encounter each other, we are often facing a creature that we are not at all familiar with and have been taught to despise. For black women, her humanity is in question, as is her beauty and desirability. Her sex appeal is still intact, and it is all she is left with, and as a result, it is all that is coveted. Alright, study groups, before I go on, please take a few seconds to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to know when new videos are released or when I go live. This is a significant way to support the channel, so I'd really appreciate it if you go ahead and do that for me. I'll even take a moment of silence to let you do it. Okay, thank you, study group. I really appreciate your support. I really do. Now let's continue. Now, regardless of how terrible of a provider or protector the man could be, black broken women simply would rather stay in the familiar relationship than to try to find better. Their self-esteem is so low and their codependence is so extreme that their primary mission in life tends to be to keep the man. Nikki Jones says that inner city girls dream of being carried off by a Prince Charming who would love them, provide for them, and give them a family. But the boys often desire sex without commitment or babies without responsibility for them. Even if the relationship is troubled, it takes far less energy to negotiate a known relationship than to initiate a new one. Now, because these women fail to recognize their self-worth, they stay in these relationships hoping that someday the man will grow to love and respect them.
Women think that if I do it more for him, listen, like that if I pick up his kids, if I give him as much sex as he wants, if I turn him out, if I show him I'm that ride or die chick, I'm that chick, right? Then the more I do, they think that I'm going to get his affection. But that ain't how men operate. And y'all can tell me this, watch this. A man doesn't commit to the woman for what she does for him. He commits to her based on who she is to him.
Rajan Prasad says that as a result, the black man finds it easy to stray because she will always be there. She is so often taken for granted and unwanted that she hopelessly seeks love and attention from those, including her own children, who are taught to despise her. She is easily exploited, but most important, she will always be available. To them, the availability of men is so slim to none, and rather than date out of the black race, they decided that they would rather be alone. Emotional strength is another character the black woman has had to develop, because no man of any race will put a clamp on his sexual needs because the woman he wants is unavailable. This is the perfect example of black women always being there. How many other black women are out there shutting down their needs and desires, hoping to revive them when things change?
We turn now to a woman terrorized by an ex-boyfriend, finally able to sleep a little easier tonight. The man allegedly beat up the victim in a convenience store. While the victim was waiting for the man to be arrested, she says he tracked her down and shot her in the leg. 7 Action News reporter Kimberly Craig hears from the victim about how this terrifying situation escalated and how officers finally located the man before it was too late.
Tired of living in fear, Destiny was desperate for help, and today here at the 12th precinct came the news she was waiting for.
I'm one of those women who never said a lot or never did too much. But now I'm so tired and now I need help.
Destiny heard Lindsay said it's her ex-boyfriend who has been terrorizing her. One of the attacks taking place just a few weeks ago on Memorial Day inside a party store near Livernois in the Lodge.
He instantly socks me in my face and I start to bleed out.
And this is inside the party store?
Inside the party store. I made it to the back of the store around the chip rack. But in between this happening and him socking me, the people behind the glass tell us to get out of his store with that. So I made it around the chip rack and I'm trying to call 911, but the call's not going through. No one's picking up.
Her ex allegedly stole her purse before fleeing the location. He's now been charged with robbery and domestic violence. And Destiny says it wasn't the first time he's assaulted her.
Well, he's got an extensive criminal history with a lot of domestic violence issues in the past.
Detroit police say they were trying to find Destiny's ex since the party store assault, but he managed to elude them when they were close.
He will flee at any sign of police, either in a vehicle or on foot.
Then last week, late at night, as Destiny was arriving at a friend's house, she says a car was slowly pulling up, and a masked man got out, and she quickly realized it was her ex.
He attacks me, pushed me into the door, tell me, yeah, I got you now, and starts firing off shots, shoots me in my leg, and continue to fire shots as he run back to the car.
The bullet shattered Destiny's leg.
Every day I think about what would be his reason of doing something so cruel to me. And the only thing I can think is if he killed me, I can't go to court to say what he's done. But why do this? Why make things even more worse than what you've already done when I just asked you to leave me alone? That's all I want to do is be left alone.
Then today, as we were talking to Detroit police, the news Destiny has been waiting for.
That was one of my sergeants from my special operations unit. We just got Mr. Moore into custody.
I'm just thankful and thank everybody who's been out there looking for him, risking their life possibly to find him. And I'm just thankful.
She's thankful her ex is off the street and hopes he's given a high bond so she can finally rest. And she says this to anyone in an abusive relationship.
If you're scared to get help, still go and try. You never know if you never try. I wish I tried way longer before now.
In Detroit, Kimberly Craig, 7 Action News.
If you or someone you know is a victim of domestic violence, there is help available.
What's even more devastating to many black women is that so many black men aim to penetrate whiteness to escape the angry black woman. These guys prefer white women and will achieve success simply to access them. There are ample scenarios of black women helping black men achieve success only to end up watching as they celebrate it with the women of no color. Black men aim to erase themselves by having biracial babies, especially daughters that possess little to no resemblance of black women. These guys believe that in order for black women to be desirable, she must possess a perfect image, attitude, temperament, and status. The worst part is that white women only need to appear to have these qualities. The white woman could look ordinary, she could have no job, education, or any significant credentials, yet an established black man will feel more empowered having her than a black woman who possesses all said perfect characteristics. Rajan Persal says that this weans the black man toward a deeper appreciation for the white woman because he has been ordained to do so. If he is to escape his existence and rid himself of his race, he must complete himself with the white woman. This is how he will eventually design his difference and come to terms with his self-hatred.
1. Out of all groups of women in society, black women are afforded the most freedom in the framework of relationships. How? Just because they are the most likely to stand up for themselves does not mean they have the most freedom in the framework of a relationship. Go ahead and just say that you don't like when black women stand up for themselves, and you categorize that as disrespect. What you're meaning to say there is you wish that more black women would be fully submissive to you and not stand up when you do things to disrespect and degrade them. A lot of black men go after white women thinking that they're going to be submissive and not stand up to them. In some cases, this is true, but then there's women like me that surprise the fuck out of y'all.
Bitter Men Podcast got you brothers out here really tripping, man. Y'all want to keep comparing black women to women of other races as it pertains to their femininity, but you don't want to compare yourself to their men as it pertains to your masculinity. Those women's men have governments. They have militaries. They have economies where they provide for their people, in particular their women. You want black women to be so soft for you, but they on the same plantation with you and you ain't provide them with no freedom. All you want to do is vote for a white man to change your life. You want to go get a white man to give you a job. If the white man is providing everything for you, how a woman supposed to have respect for you and your masculinity? You ain't fighting for black folks' autonomy. You ain't fighting to create your own stuff for black people, for our women to be comfortable with us. If you are not a part of the liberation struggle, you deserve a hard woman because you a bitch.
Hey, just know, I tried my best with you coloreds.
As a black man who's dated mostly white women throughout his life, bro, I promise you, that ain't... See, let me tell you the biggest difference I noticed. Black women are direct. Like, if they don't like something, they just gonna speak on it. They don't really give a fuck. And I appreciate the fuck out of that. Because I ain't met too many white women that do that. Instead, they play all these psychological games to manipulate you into doing what they want you to do. All while having an attitude when they could have just said, hey, I don't like this shit, don't do this. But I can say, until I started dealing with black women, I ain't know peace the way I know peace now. You gonna learn.
Social media has given the once silenced and invisible black boys and men voices to express their obscenities and hatred towards black women. These guys will get on the internet and exclaim to the world that they're fed up with black women, but the real reason is they're fed up with either lacking access to their preferred black woman or not being able to provide for black women in a way that's sufficient enough, or they fail to live up to black women's expectations. Therefore, they shame black women and suggest that all other non-black women are best suited for them. And even if these men are actually tired of certain black women's hostile personalities, these black men never acknowledge their role in causing the hostility. And this can be so infuriating. Not to mention how frustrating it is to have such a significant portion of black male homosexuals, because this further reduces black women's mating pool. And these women acknowledge the wealth of gay black men that are successful, attractive, and will make perfect husbands, but those men simply aren't available to them. And then there are black men on the down low. These men tend to be very antagonistic to black women because they covertly want to be with other men. Numerous black women are irritated because of the wealth of black men that are down low, and these guys typically be spreading HIV and AIDS and other venereal diseases at alarming rates. Authors Marsiglia and Kulis discussed the reality of down low men and the HIV crisis. They said that the secrecy embraced by these men may create serious health risks for down low men and their sexual partners, both male and female. Their closeted existence and the stigmatization of same-sex behavior in their communities tend to block these men's access to HIV/AIDS related information and services that are more widely available to white middle-class gay men. In addition, cultural attitudes sometimes discourage condom use. They go on to add that the down low phenomenon is suspected of contributing to the developing crisis of HIV infection among African Americans, who now make up half of all new HIV cases in the United States. A lot of black women are aggressive even if they're in a loving space and around people that care for them. In many cases, their wounds prevent them from receiving and reciprocating affection. This is why, despite expressing kindness to some black women, they respond with hostility or aggression. Angry black women typically don't share sisterhood with other black women. They instead view them as enemies and competitors. And those that hate themselves are prone to hate other black women because many times they see their own reflection in them, which they despise. Sometimes they see everything they're not in other black women. Too many of them make terrible friends. How many black women have you heard claim not to have any friends at all because the ones they had were either jealous, envious, selfish, disloyal, or projected their disapproval of themselves onto their so-called friends? Their insidious ways will cause them to sleep with their best friend's man or betray their friend in some sort of way.
Guess what I found out today, y'all? So you know when women be like, oh, I don't owe her no loyalty, or, you know, she don't owe her no loyalty. Guess what I found out from people at my job, right? So we was watching Cheaters on our lunch break. They was playing it in the break room. And this older lady was like, I think she's like 70 or 80 years old. This lady, she's old, but she's the front desk lady. She was like, oh, girls used to say that back in the day to justify going after a man that was taken. She said a woman would come after a guy who she knew was married or who she knew had a boyfriend. And then when people be like, oh, you know, that's such and such boyfriend, she would be like, I don't owe her no loyalty. Like they would use that as an excuse to get away with trying to sleep with or request being somebody's side piece. So she said, if a woman says, I don't owe her no loyalty, she's a side piece. So when you and her fall out, your man will not be off limits because she don't owe you no loyalty.
These types of black women are so mean that they can be dangerous, especially towards each other. Those that fight with one another aim to kill or permanently maim the other, and many times they're only projecting the rage they feel about themselves onto the other person. Author Bell Hooks wrote a book called Black Looks, Race and Representation. And she says that oppressed and exploited women can turn rage and hostility inward on themselves and outward towards those who care about them. This has often been the case in black female encounters with one another. A vast majority of black women in this society receive sustained care only from other black women. That care does not always mediate or alter rage or the desire to inflict pain. It may just provoke it. Now, in typical black communities, especially the poor ones, mental health is a serious concern. Most black environments lack resources necessary for young girls and women with mental health problems. And the worst part is that too many black people simply aren't even aware that they're experiencing poor mental health. They usually ignore, minimize, or push past the symptoms. If one has constant anger, frustration, irritability, and aggression, especially if there's no cause for it, these are signs of potential mental health issues. And because so many black girls and women experience sexual, mental, emotional, and physical abuse, they end up suffering from PTSD or anxiety, depression, or other mental health disorders that typically go undiagnosed and unaddressed. The results are usually difficulty maintaining healthy relationships and exerting aggressive masculine behavior. Now, although poor mental health conditions are rampant in black communities, the sad part is that black people are the least likely to acquire help to address these issues. Being black tends to be about struggle and chronic stress with no relief, and this can dramatically change the chemicals in the brain, resulting in poor mental health. These chemicals are important for mood regulation and well-being, so without addressing their altered brain chemistry, black women are susceptible to exhibit misunderstood unhealthy behaviors.
In this house stays in this house. I don't talk about my feelings to other people. Girl, that's for white folks. Black folks, we got this. I'ma just go to Jesus and pray about it. Why? What goes on in this house stays in this house. And we were never taught to talk about the things that are affecting us daily. So if I'm uncomfortable mentally and emotionally, I was taught you just hold it on. Why? Because it stays in this house. But those are the things that keep people suffering in silence. Those are the things that are having people not sleep. Those are the things that keep those generational curses from going on, because we know it has to stay in this house. And also, we don't know what it looks like because we never were taught to talk about it. So oftentimes, we miss those signs and those symptoms. So what do you do if someone does say, I have some emotional or mental distress? People are like, I don't know what to do with that. It's not that difficult. Start with just being a listening ear. Just listen to what they say with no judgment. Listen, help them figure out, how do you find a therapist? We have this great thing called Google now. You can find just about any and everything on it. All you have to do is look them up. They want someone who is a male therapist. You can look that up. If you want a black therapist, you can look that up. But the biggest thing is just start with being a kind and listening ear.
There is a large subset of black women that are so oppressed and marginalized that they hate their own blackness. These women have been psychologically beaten down in their blackness to the point that they want to be white. So they'll do anything that is necessary to speak, look, and behave like white women. Some of them will bleach their skin or even poison themselves with chemicals to appear white. Sometimes they assimilate to white society so much that they only date white men. Many of them hate black people and culture and will get on global platforms to ridicule black people in front of white audiences. One of the first black women to internationally portray the black race for white people is poet Phyllis Whitley. She is a perfect example of a self-hating black woman who was one of the first to gain international recognition by white society for showing graciousness for slavery. Wheatley was an African woman born in West Africa in the 1700s, and after she was captured by white colonizers, she eventually developed Stockholm Syndrome for white supremacy. She became the first best-selling author that intellectually praised her white captors and white people for their kindness and acts of compassion by saving her from her dark native home in Africa. Kidnapping her, she called saving. In one of her writings, she wrote, "'Twas not long since I left my native shore, the land of errors and Egyptian gloom. Father of mercy, 'twas thy gracious hand brought me in safety from those dark abodes." First of all, she said that her home, her African home, was the land of errors. Then she said, "Father of mercy," referring to white criminals, kidnappers, murderers, rapists. "'Twas thy gracious hand brought me in safety." Stole her, kidnapped her, but she refers to bringing her in safety from those dark abodes. Now, if this ain't a self-hating black woman, I don't know what is. These self-hating words served as a major disservice to the black collective because they came from an actual slave. Whitley had essentially told the world that she's thankful for the slave trade. She gave the white race the impression that slavery couldn't have been too horrific if a slave could be appreciative of the institution. Rajan Prasad adds that her words were more potent because it was the victim thanking the victimizer for being victimized. Her work was powerful because if the oppressed can find redeeming qualities in their oppressors, then they are not really oppressed. We must be doing something right. Phyllis is educated, and it's her people who claim we are oppressing them. But we are just civilizing them, and one day they will all share Phyllis's successes. It's just a matter of time. Rajan goes on to add that she completely escapaded war criminals who stole well over 100 million human beings from their homeland, which she called dark abodes. She served as a symbol for the continued unjustified brutalization of her own people. Phyllis used her talent to express a belief that later became an instrument of propaganda to perpetuate racist ideals. These flattering poems of white society penned by a black writer were published and read around the world while she was paraded as a symbol of civilizing success. She praised and prayed for George Washington, the father of the United States and proud, unwavering owner of more than 200 slaves. She praised him for his passionate and idealistic pursuit of freedom and prayed for his success over oppression. At this point, she was still a slave, and even when her good masters died, they left her freedom in question. Now, Candace Owens is the modern-day self-hating black woman, and she uses her international platform to spew racist rhetoric about her own people. she gets tokens and approval from white people for this conduct. Black women like this are so angry about their oppressed condition in society that they aim to prove to whites that they are not to be associated with the black collective. These women are the different blacks that white society accepts because they imitate whiteness by taking on white supremacist ideology. I mean, how can one not be angry if they're constantly referred to as the least desirable woman on the planet? Black women are condemned for having dark skin and kinky hair, full lips and noses, and other physical features that are simply atypical of white women. They're called too fat and smelly, and are told that they wear too much weave and makeup and should be more natural. But here's the irony. When they are more natural, they're called ugly and plain, and simply aren't the preference. What's even more frustrating is that although their physical traits fail European standards of beauty, a large portion of non-black women aim to imitate them. Black features are beautiful only when packaged in white skin, and for this reason, many black women despise their own blackness. Now, Dr. Naeem Akbar says that our persistent and futile efforts to look like and act like Caucasian people is based upon this sense of inferiority. The persistent tendency to think of dark skin as unattractive, as kinky hair as bad hair, and African features as less appealing than Caucasian features come from this sense of inferiority. Suicide rates are increasing annually amongst black girls because they aren't taught how to cope with or manage their pain and frustration. Ongoing emotional distress with no means of relief leaves many of them helpless and suicidal. When a child is poor, being bullied, abused, and neglected from their parents, their teachers, their family, and their overall community, this leaves black children more vulnerable than they already are living in those volatile environments. Many of them have impaired cognitive development or learning disabilities. Sometimes they have behavior problems and early school failure, which tremendously impacts their self-esteem. And this leaves them with a sense of not belonging. These kids are the ones more likely to drop out of school or be aggressive and impulsive. These are the ones that commit the crimes and make poor decisions that can permanently impact their lives, leaving them in cemeteries of serving life sentences in prison. The unfortunate fact is that dysfunctionality wasn't always prevalent to black women. I mean, there used to be social support systems in the community that worked to produce upstanding, well-rounded, mentally healthy women. At one point, specifically during segregation, black women were united and emphasized the importance of black pride, self-accountability, and determination for the betterment of other black people. During this time, black folks had a common goal, and that was the survival against white supremacy. Black men and women with children married and fulfilled roles that satisfied the needs of the family. Young girls were protected because their environment, including the home, the neighborhoods, the school, and the church, was composed of adults who weren't self-serving. You had fathers that provided for and protected their girls. And black adults recognized the importance of children growing up in a free society with access to opportunities that simply weren't warranted to them. These people relied on their children to become adults that would make a difference for all black people. This was the period when mental health issues amongst black women were the lowest and family and other relationships were the strongest. But over decades of abandonment by black men, discrimination, psychological and chemical warfare, criminal injustice, financial stagnancy, inefficient education, and other institutional forces and systems that prevented upward mobility for black society, black women were forced into matriarchal roles that resulted in generational deterioration. Then the stereotypes that's been following black women for centuries, including the welfare queen and lazy, fat, gold digging, etc. They're so old. These influenced how black women view themselves and each other without vigilantly interrogating those beliefs. Michelle Wallace wrote a book called Black Macho and the Myth of the Superwoman, where she talks about young black women adopting the stereotypical ideals of black womanhood, and this resulted in their anger and frustration. According to Michelle, the black woman, whatever her status, housewife, society lady, or career woman, would have learned by the time she reached adolescence that somehow to be a black woman is bad, that the black woman is Aunt Jemima or a whore, and that she must smile so that black men won't think she's tough and matriarchal. And she need not end up in trouble necessarily, in prison, in a juvenile home, on drugs, on the street as a prostitute, or having a baby at 14, just in a dead-end job that she hates, in an unhappy, destructive marriage, having children she doesn't want, or wasn't ready to have, or shouldn't have had. Or she might just become a quiet alcoholic, overweight, and with high blood pressure, or chronically depressed. The point is that life of such a young woman is gone, and she never once exercised any control over it.
What is your problem with black women? That's the real question.
Yo, bro, thank you for having this incredibly important conversation, and just thank you for standing on your box despite what some of these clowns are saying. I think a lot of us don't realize that we've been socialized to treat our sisters the way we treat them, right? Everything that we hear, everything that we listen to from the time that we young men, right, is, yo, they're here to please you. Bend them over, do this, do that. And so because our women are objectified, black women in particular, when they cease to please us, when they cease to exist as something that we can get something from, take something from, they become an itch, this, that, and they're easily discarded because we never regarded them as full human beings in the first place. And the saddest part about this is that this kind of behavior, this kind of mentality is rooted in slavery. When they took our women, abused our women, raped our women, and literally objectified black women as those who we can get sexual pleasure from or get children from that we may or may not claim. That's what the slave master did. So when we talk about the behavior of black men and how little regard, how little respect we have for sisters, when we actually identify where that behavior is rooted at, it should terrify us. You talking about flee? We should flee from that, because all we replicating, all we duplicating over and over again is what the slave master did to our families and did to our women. And then there's this third piece, right? As men, our ego is so much of our identity, who we are, what we got, what we've done, right? So for us, the other way that we're socialized and trained is to think about our value as what I have accomplished and what I have done. We don't talk about intrinsic worth and value. We don't talk about just because I exist, just because God made me, I have real intrinsic value. And so as a result, when black women start to thrive, right? Particularly for those of us brothers who may be struggling with work or employment or been through the system or whatever the case is, right? Even those of us who have stuff and have done well can feel incredibly small and insecure once we start to see sisters thrive. And when you look at who's graduating the most from college, when you look at who's having the most success in this country, it is right now currently black women. And so we also got to do an ego check. We're going to have to comb through all that insecurity and lay it to the side and realize that if they are winning, we are winning. Because black women then held a position down that if we winning, if black men are winning, that all of us are winning. They done held us down through everything. And so again, bro, just want to say thank you for lifting us up. We got a real issue around socialization. And if we don't take time to unpack that, we're going to continue to be the dog that's following behind the master telling us what to do. Salute, homie.
Although religion serves many black women very well, it sometimes keeps others in mental bondage, and this can result in frustration and aggression. Black women are the most spiritual people on the planet, which is why so many of them are loyal to their religion, especially Christianity. Unfortunately, however, their African religions were removed and replaced with Christianity by their white captors. The colonizers' reasons for indoctrinating black women with this religion were not to elevate and give their lives meaning and purpose, but instead to convince them that their inferiority and enslavement were destined by God. The words in the Bible were the only hope black people had during slavery, specifically that God would free them from bondage in the afterlife, but their lives on earth were meant to obey their master. Christian biblical teachings tend to spiritually enforce patriarchy, sexism, and racism, such as God cursed people with black skin. These teachings have caused many black women to accept their role in patriarchy as non-factors, aside from serving man and breeding children. Christianity teaches male domination, identification, centeredness, and control, and all of these things most black women subscribe to. In many cases, the religion prevents many black women from critically thinking to make decisions that impact their overall well-being. Most pastors are men that preach obedience and male domination, causing many black women to fail to use reason and logic in their dealings or relationships with other men. For instance, it is taught that God made man the head or leader, and most black women accept this, enforcing it in their lives even if their man is completely incapable of leadership. And not to mention that Christianity renders most human activities sins, and this prevents many black women from living fulfilling lives out of fear that they're being sinful. This is what I essentially call spiritual imprisonment. So many black women even rely on God for miracles instead of taking the necessary actions to accomplish their goals. How many poor black women have you heard claim that God will deliver them from poverty without seeking a job or other resources to get them out of their situation? What's more are the black women that worship the white image of God. Dr. Naeem Ekbar says that the most obvious problem which comes from the experience of seeing God in the image of somebody other than yourself is that it creates an idea that the image represented is superior and you are inferior. You believe they are superior and you are inferior, and sure enough, you will start acting inferior. You begin to dress inferior. You begin to feel inferior. You begin to think inferior. You begin to have families that are inferior. You become economically inferior. You become academically inferior. You begin to follow the program. The first psychological necessity of making someone into a slave is to make the person believe he or she is out to be a slave. Now, although there are a multitude of causations for most black women's aggression and overwhelming masculinity, the primary root cause is the effects of slavery, which was passed down from generation to generation, resulting in their oppression and exploitation, essentially producing internal pain expressed outwardly in the form of hostility. There are endless reasons that reflect anger in black women that can all be rooted to slavery, and Dr. Naeem Ekbar says that there is a certain hesitation about dwelling on events of the past. On the one hand, it creates an atmosphere of determinism, which removes the volitional possibilities of people to alter their condition. It tends to excuse the perpetuation of past events, which could be altered simply by initiative. It is an emotional tirade that ultimately provides no constructive solutions for the present. But those who deny the lessons of the past are doomed to repeat them. Those who fail to recognize that the past is a shaper of the present and the hand of yesterday continues to write on the slate of today leaves them vulnerable by not realizing the impact of influences which do serve to shape their lives. While most angry black women come from poverty, many don't. But their commonality oftentimes is neglect, abuse, lack of support from family and their communities. Aggressive black women have been let down in their lives by themselves, their family, and society as a whole. Lacking fatherly provisions and protection, or motherly love and guidance, or even communal support results in animosity and expressions of frustration. Making decisions that aren't conducive to the well-being of themselves, such as teenage pregnancy and promiscuity, sexual exploitation, etc. These things contribute to the feelings of hopelessness, and this perpetuates anger and hostility within many black women. Abandonment by their children's father and physical, mental, and emotional abuse by his hands also promote feelings and expressions of aggression. Religion is meant to uplift and provide purpose to one's life. It is intended to serve people, not for people to serve it. If one's religion is working for them, allowing them to maximize their potential for greatness, then clearly the religion is serving them. However, if one is living a life as a slave to man, materials, or etc. in the name of God, then religion is preventing them from living in the image of God. And this is exactly what the slave masters intended. Overall, black women have to liberate and decolonize their mind from the clutches of white supremacy and the residuals of slavery. Dr. Naeem Ekbar emphasized that the only way to achieve this is to reference the history of slavery in order to understand the experiences of their ancestors and the psychological impact as a result. The poor mental condition, behaviors, and responses of the black community can be reversed with knowledge, therapy, and by educating their children about the historical treatment of their people. Black people need to learn their history prior to the slave trade to see that they are far more than slaves. As a matter of fact, they are the originators of civilization, and these things need to be taught and passed on to children. Furthermore, black women must accept that black men are also mentally imprisoned by the system of white supremacy. And unless these men reclaim and decolonize their mind and remember their life purpose and priority prior to captivity, which is the black woman and their children, in other words, the black family, they will remain stunted, subjugated, and imitators of white men.
We have more black women, right, graduating from college, 2-to-1 to black men. You throw in incarceration rates, you throw in the unemployment rates, and you're saying there's just not enough black men.
Well, there are not enough black men for all of the college-educated black women in particular that have the type of husbands that they want to have.
The type that they want to have. Now, I put this out, and we had this conversation yesterday, and a lot of people were chiming in, and I decided to ask for questions from viewers. And one of the questions, simply put, is, do black women deserve better than what black men have to offer? That seems like a very heavy question there, but is that essentially what it is? Do we not measure up to the quality of black women right now?
That's really a great way to put it. And I will admit that I usually think about it from the other perspective, which is that is it fair to ask black women to sacrifice their own happiness on the altar, as it were, of black men's struggles? And I think not.
What is that?
I think not.
Okay, what's that sacrifice necessarily when we're talking about, and I asked you this question yesterday, is it always marrying down if the person you're marrying doesn't make as much money or have the same level of education? Could be a good guy.
Yeah, he could be a good guy, and lots of relationships work across classes, that's true. But it's also the case that for everyone, not simply for the women, but for the men as well, having a spouse who is matched to you educationally in terms of your outlook, your aspirations, your experiences, that's a positive thing. So it's actually not a great thing for the wife or the husband if they're in a mismatched relationship.
All right, and we know a lot of conversations were started yesterday because of this topic, and I had one of these conversations at my house with Mrs. Holmes, and one of these things that keeps coming up is how do you, and the word I think my wife used was reprogram, if you will, black women, because you're suggesting they need to be open to dating outside of their race. But, you know, a lot of black women just like brothers. They like the black man.
Right.
So if you're just not attracted naturally, why have them give up on finding a black man?
Right, that's a great question. And the issue, the way I think of that is that women have been asked to carry a great load. Black women shoulder a lot of the burden, in short, of black men's struggles. And I am asking women to put the burden down. Many women think that they're attracted to black men. They are attracted to black men. But attraction itself is complicated. And one of the things that I discovered in the course of writing this book is that there's a whole host of fears and desires and anxieties that animate black women's attraction to black men.
Okay, and on that, though, I got another question from a viewer. Judy sent in and said, well, it sounds like you're saying, why should black women give up the good fight? You know, you're not telling them to take on a project of fixing a man necessarily, but why just give up on black men?
Right, that is another great question. I actually am asking black women to give up the good fight because the fight hasn't been successful. The fight has not been successful. This is what a friend of mine, Carolyn Edgar, calls a Negro Improvement Project, which is what a lot of black women undertake, and often the results are not so great. So the strategy has been counterproductive. It doesn't help African Americans for us to have black men and black women locked in bad relationships and raising children in households where the parents quarrel and ultimately divorce. Well, that's not a win for anyone.
It is law professor Ralph Richard Banks. The book is called Is Marriage for White People? I think it went on sale on the 2nd this week, and it has started a conversation that I'm sure will continue.
Until then, black women must understand and reject the ideology originated by white society, and they only did this for the purpose of superiority. Healing is the only means to overcome pain that prevents them from resting in their femininity and rejecting that aggressive masculine persona.
Black woman, let's talk about healing. I can't imagine the psychological burden of our foremothers to suck up their trauma, but I know the burden that I carried was heavy. We are all victims of that same ideology, to suck it up and just keep on going. The only survival tools that we had to survive the beatings, the raping, the murdering, and the outright terror of black women. Just suck it up or give it to Jesus. Oh, let's talk about healing, because even preparing this chat about the multiple layers that women have to undo to heal, I became physically ill. I felt a heaviness in my chest every time I experienced or witnessed black women and her children just trying to exist in a world that rejects her. I see new wounds being created and old wounds reopening, decades and decades of wounds buried in secrets and shame, never to be acknowledged or healed. Let's talk about healing, because we've only been accustomed to dealing with everything that life has thrown our way. I mean, that's just how it goes, right? It is what it is. Boy, I tell you, the black woman, she can just take it and keep on going, and she bends to nothing because she knows whatever don't kill her will only make her stronger. And she's developed quite the sense of humor, too, laughing at things that aren't funny at all as a coping mechanism to cover up this trauma. She laughs. God knows it saved her sanity in life so many times, as Lord knows how many times. If she didn't laugh, she surely would have cried. You do know you can cry, right? Did you know you were allowed to feel every bit of that real pain?
We have to do a better job at looking at our mental health as our physical health. When we are in physical pain, we go seek a doctor. Well, guess what? We are in emotional pain and we are in mental pain, and we need to go see a doctor. We have to acknowledge that mental health is physical health. It is a part of our overall body. We are mind, body, and soul. We are connected. And so when one part is off, all parts are off. So just like we know, how come most people's stomach hurts sometimes when they have anxiety? Because the mind and the body is connected. Mental health is physical health. And we have to do better at when we are in any kind of distress, go to the doctor and acknowledge that, hey, guess what? The doctors can't really find anything going on with my stomach. My heart's racing, my hands are sweating, and the doctors are like, I'm good. They told me to go to a therapist. Then go to a therapist. Stop putting that off. Often, time and time again, we wait and we don't go. See, just like you would go to the doctor if you broke your foot, because after a while, you need your foot. It hurts to walk on it for too long, right? You need it. You need to walk. Even if you got to get crutches, it's a walking utensil. If you have to have a cast, you're going to walk. You're going to figure out one way or another. I've been having this foot for this long, and all of a sudden, this foot is causing me distress. I'm going to go figure it out, right? Why wouldn't you figure it out if your mind is in distress, if your emotions in distress? Because guess what? You're going to come see a therapist, and just like you might get crutches, you might get a cast, well, guess what? I'm going to give you some tools and utensils to help you feel better. What I'm going to say is, hey, let's try some deep breathing. Why deep breathing? Because that can slow your heart rate down. Because sometimes when your heart is going so fast, you speak fast. Your breathing will change. If you're not breathing the correct way, you will pass out. That's what hyperventilation is. That's why I'm going to say do deep breathing. Why am I going to tell you to do some yoga or meditation? I'm going to tell you to do that because that teaches you how to be mindfully present in your body.
Okay, so go ahead and leave some comments below. Let me know if you agree with my commentary. Why do you believe so many black women express aggressive and masculine characteristics? What solutions would you recommend to black women to rid themselves of internal pain and anger that renders them undesirable? Let me know your thoughts. Also, if you have any topics that you'd like for me to cover, please send them to blackhistorystudent@gmail.com. This email is listed in the description section below. If you're interested in reading any of the books that I've referenced in this commentary, I've listed them in the description section below. And if you decide to purchase them, please do so using my affiliate links because I do receive a little commission for each sale, and you will be supporting the channel by doing so. If you'd like to read the article on this topic, please click on the link in the description section or visit blackhistorystudent.com. Finally, if you haven't done so already, like the video. If you're new, subscribe to the channel, and if you love the video, share it. Until next time, bye study group!